Hello everyone, my name is Jeremy. I'm a former PhD student of Claudio's, and this week we're going to be discussing insect mutualisms. We're going to specifically be talking about pollination as a type of insect mutualism, and we're going to discuss the evolutionary history of these, as well as the ways in which humans have actually co-opted these mutualisms for our benefit, and that's pretty much what's used with agriculture. Okie doke, so let's get started here. All right, so far you guys have discussed a number of antagonistic interactions that occur between insects and one another, including competition and predation, as well as between insects and plants via herbivory. As fascinating as these interactions are, another set of interactions between species can help, or in some cases be essential, for any of these three interactions to occur. That's what we're going to be briefly discussing today in this video. So these positive facilitating associations between species are called mutualisms. While this photo is pretty cute and kind of cartoonizes this association, we wouldn't actually consider any possible interactions a mutualism, as this would be between the same two species. So we're looking at beneficial associations between species, so a plus and a plus for both of them. So these mutualisms can form through a number of different pathways, but in general we think of them as sort of a quid pro quo. It's an exchange of some good or service in exchange for another good or a service. Now in some cases mutualisms have to be obligate, that is, they're a necessary association required for individuals in the mutualism to survive. A good example of this, which we'll discuss in more detail shortly, is that of fig wasps and fig trees. Now, in most cases, mutualisms are facultative. They're interactions that are beneficial and that enhance the fitness of both partners, but are not required for successful survival and reproduction. Now, there's a bunch of different ways we can think about mutualisms in terms of what is provided, but in general, we tend to break these down into three different categories. The first of which are dispersal mutualisms. These involve one party moving propagules. These can be things that are seeds, fruits, or gametes, or even individuals in the cases of foracy. And typically the dispersers are rewarded by consuming some of those propagules. In the case of pollinators, we might think of bees consuming pollen. Another type are exploitative mutualisms, and these allow individuals to gain access to a novel food resource. We can think of ants tending aphids as being rewarded in their defense with aphid honeydew. Another striking example of an exploitative mutualism occurs through microbial gut symbionts, which allow insects, along with a huge swath of terrestrial biota, ourselves included, to consume formerly recalcitrant or nutritionally incomplete food sources. And the very last we can think of here are protective mutualisms. This is pretty simple to think about. It's when one organism provides defense or safe harbor for another. Now, within these systems, one mutualism typically confers multiple benefits, as in the case of ants tending aphids here. The ants are able to consume a novel food source, that is honeydew. That's an exploitative mutualism, while aphids are afforded protective mutualisms through the ants defending them against any potential predators, such as lady beetles. All right. So from these different types of mutualistic interactions, it's easy to see how mutualisms would almost be ubiquitous. In fact, work by Peter Price in the British Isles found that almost half of the insect species on these islands form some form of mutualistic interaction with one another. And indeed, mutualisms are a primary driving force for evolutionary associations, including something as foundational as a eukaryotic cell, which is essentially confined mutualism between several formerly free-living prokaryotes, notably with mitochondria and chloroplasts. Now, more relevant to our class are mutualisms between insects and angiosperms that formed in the late Cretaceous period, and these were foundational to massive radiations of major insect orders such as flies, butterflies and moths, as well as ants, bees, and wasps. So we can think about these mutualisms in terms of evolutionary history, and we can think about how they actually come to be. And the most likely explanation is actually via changes in existing antagonistic or neutral relationships between species that are operated on by natural selection. So parasites that have already developed a close association or symbiosis with their host might actually be benefited through the evolution of lesser impact, ultimately leading to a commensalistic or even potentially a mutualistic relationship. So competitors, however, are much less likely to kind of go across this path, and they're less likely to evolve into mutualisms, as competitors are, at least formerly, using the same resources. So helping each other out proves a bit problematic in terms of developing a mutualistic relationship, as you're relying on the same thing. So typically, mutualisms occur between organisms that are using different resources, that are on different trophic levels, and because of the evolutionary history of mutualisms from parasitism or even from predation in some cases, there are often a cost associated with for each species. So Jansen refers to these sorts of things as reciprocal parasitism, where the negative impact of these partners is approximately balanced. So this ultimately means that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Now, an example of this occurs between a species of globe flower, pictured here, along with its pollinators, which is a genera of root maggot flies in the family Anthomyiidae. So what happens is these flies will crawl inside of this floral umbel, and inside of there they will lay their eggs on, develop, and eventually consume the seeds that they're developing in there. Now, as the number of eggs laid per flower increases, so ultimately does the fruit set, and that's in the seed set, which you can see here on the very top line, the black line. However, more hungry fly babies should ultimately mean fewer seeds left over for plant reproduction. And while this is ultimately the case, this bottom line here, which is actually the relative seed set, the seed set is actually pretty stable across the range of naturally occurring fly egg densities. Now, the difference between these two lines, the seed initiation and the ultimate seed set, represents the cost of pollination for this globe flower. But ultimately, there's still a large net benefit in seed production, despite the consumption that occurs. So I'm also going to go through two kind of classic examples of obligate mutualisms that come to mind for most people, the first of which being figs and fig wasps. So there are about 900 different fig species that are all pollinated by one or several chalcidoid wasps. The life cycle of this mutualism can vary pretty greatly, but in general, this is kind of how it goes. So figs have a pretty unique flower design, which is actually called a false fruit, which you can see on the left here. So if you think about the typical fig, what it basically is an inverted flower. So inside the fig are both male and female flowers that are separated in time from one another. Female flowers become receptive first, and a small opening at the top of the flower that's called the ostiole opens up and allows a female fig wasp to crawl inside. Once she's in there, she's going to start laying eggs inside of the ovaries of these developing figs. Now, during the intermediate phase, which is called an interfloral phase, the wasp larvae are going to develop and consume the ovary, while the unattacked fig ovules will develop into seeds. The flower then enters a male phase where flowers become productive and start to shed pollen. Now wasps that have completed their development now will begin to emerge. The male wasps will mate with the female wasps, and then they will bore an exit hole outside and allow the female wasps to escape after they have gathered pollen. The male wasps are not alate, they don't have wings, and their sole purpose is to mate with the females and then dig out an exit tunnel for those females. The female will then exit the fig. She'll fly out and try to locate a fig fruit that is just entering the female phase, where the process sort of begins anew. Now, this extremely specific mutualism has led to a number of co-evolved traits for both the plant, including the fruit design, the flower structure, and the temporal separation of the male and female parts, as well as the wasp, including the specialized morphology that's needed for the fig wasps to enter and to exit the flowers. Now, it's easy to see how this relationship was evolved likely from parasitism. The behaviors elicited by the wasp are very close to the relatives of these wasps, which are primarily parasitoids. Other examples of obligate mutualisms include yucca and yucca moths, as well as Sonida cactus and Sonida moths. Both of these follow a similar trajectory as the globe flower, where their individuals are both plant pollinators and seed predators both. And in both cases here, the net cost of the seed predation is less than that of the net benefit from seed production via pollination. So these relationships have maintained a mutualistic state ever since. So in the next video, we are going to focus in on pollination specifically as a mutualism and discuss some of the unique interactions that allow plants to exploit insect visitors.